Welcome to Tomorrow.Africa, the podcast that explores the possibilities and the potential of Web3 in the African continent. We believe that the future of Africa is bright and that emerging technologies such as blockchain can accelerate its development. We interview people who contribute to this breakthrough in Africa and around the world and who hold a positive vision for the future. My name is Yassi Lokman and I'll be your host for this podcast. In today's episode, I'll be interviewing Glen Jordan, the founder of Empowa. Empowa is a decentralized finance platform that provides mortgages for the underserved populations in Africa, enabling them to own affordable and environmentally friendly homes. We'll be discussing how housing is at the base of wealth creation for African populations and why it is key for securing other life necessities like health, education, and security. We'll also be discussing the model of Empowa, how it utilizes NFTs to finance the construction of houses, and how it is able to be a property developer without handling the construction of houses. Glen will be sharing the achievements of Empowa in Mozambique, the roadmap of the projects, and how they aim to grow in the future across the African continent. He'll also be sharing his thoughts on blockchain solutions and the impact they could already have in Africa, his entrepreneurial journey, and how he was able to leverage the collaboration of Web3 communities to launch Empowa. Glen, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Glen, you're the founder of Empowa, a company that utilizes emerging technologies to offer affordable home loans for the financially excluded in Africa. So I have interviewed a few weeks ago John O'Connor, the Africa Operations Director of IOHK, the company behind the Cardano blockchain. And he mentioned Empowa among the initiatives launched within the Cardano ecosystem in Africa. So I'm very happy to have you here at the Tomorrow.Africa podcast to discuss what you're doing and the impact that you're aiming to have in Africa. So Glen, can you tell more about yourself and share the highlights of the journey that got you to launch Empowa?
Sure, thanks. And yeah, thanks to John O'Connor for obviously for the comments and the good support that he's given us in what he's come up with the term real fi, and I think that's really the opportunity with new technologies to link that to opportunities on the ground, the blockchain technologies to real world challenges. But yeah, so just some background to myself. I'm a Zimbabwean by birth and upbringing. And so I've experienced the failure of governments, if you like. I've experienced that firsthand as a family. We've experienced it, and the challenges that brings, and the real thing for me is the accident of birth, that because we're born on a random spot on a map, which particularly in Africa was sort of drawn between lines by some colonial office in London or some other European city, that we're destined to a world of economic lack of opportunity, if you like. And so my real passion is to bring opportunity to those who have been excluded just through accident of birth. That's my personal passion. And how I got to Empowa, though, was I'm not a blockchain expert at all, but exactly that, in just looking for a solution. I'm being the Zimbabwean, I was running a fintech in Cape Town for fellow Zimbabweans who were allowed to come into South Africa, but then weren't allowed to open bank accounts. Again, one of these crazy rules that are set up by governments that just don't work, particularly often in emerging countries. And it was with that hat on that I was approached by a Dutch asset manager to look at how to create pensions for people who weren't in the formal employment system. And as you know, that's the vast majority of the developing world, but it's particularly relevant in Africa, where people don't have formal jobs. The 25th of the month comes, there's not a paycheck, there's not a bank account for somebody to put money into, and how to create pensions for that. And it was such an interesting challenge it was such a challenge. I couldn't resist it, and I spent years researching and just trying to come up with some way of doing it, some methodology that we could utilize. And Empowa basically is the result of that research and that effort.
So, what problem Empowa is aiming to solve exactly, and what is your value proposition in regards to solutions that already exist in Africa?
Yeah, so the problem that we're trying to solve is fundamentally is the creation of wealth. And that, in terms of that research, one of the things obviously that I discovered was that property is a fundamental building block to the creation of wealth, the ownership of property. If we look at the middle class in the developing world, it really is one of the building blocks of the creation of wealth. And for the vast majority of the world, they're excluded from that. So what we're seeking to do is there is a backlog of over 50 million homes in Africa. More than 80% of the population in Africa does not have a permanent roof over their heads. And it's that mix and people assume that that's because of poverty. And it's not. It's not because of poverty. It's because of the functional systems that just don't work. And that is financial systems as well as other systems that just don't work in this environment. And to give you an example of that, we always use this stat, but it's relevant across Africa. In Mozambique, there are 600 mortgages in a country of 30 million people. Now, no matter how skewed a society is, that is an impossible statistic. There's no ways that only 600 people should qualify for a mortgage in any society. It doesn't matter what kind of society that is. So that illustrates the complete non-functioning aspects of the financial systems and the capacity to own a home. So Empowa, what we're seeking to do is address that challenge. And the challenge of that is that we have to look at it systemically. Because it's a systems failure, we have to address it systemically. So we can't look at one aspect of the chain, but we have to look at the entire chain and say, how do we resolve that? And we start at the end, which is with the end consumer. And basically with that process, it's the mortgages are inaccessible due to the financial structures and hugely costly because of the interest rates that are charged. They're literally anywhere between 25 and 45% in most African countries. So how do we reduce those costs? How do we make those home loans available and get the ability to stimulate demand? Because as you can imagine, on the other side, there's no supply. Because who would supply? Because if there's no demand, how are you going to build affordable homes, and why would you build affordable homes? So there's very little supply in terms of people who can provide that capacity. So to support that, we're starting on the demand side.
When designing new systems that offer such a value, why have you chosen a decentralized model to tackle this issue? And why have you chosen also blockchain as an infrastructure upon which you build this solution? Couldn't a similar solution be built using a classic centralized model and mainstream technological solutions?
No. In the word, no. Because it's about the biggest challenge is transfer of value. So it's how do we get value from where there is, so effectively from where there is capital, how do we get it to where it's needed on the ground at the lowest level and it back again in the most cost-effective way. So I think that's one of the real exciting opportunities of blockchain, because the centralized systems, very simply, just don't work. And I have presented in boardrooms on many occasions where, I've stood in front of very smart people who are, very smart, very intelligent and knowledgeable about what they do, but they have no idea about what really goes on the ground in these communities. And that's the challenge with centralization, is that the people who sit in those boardrooms, those highly intelligent people, don't know what's going on the ground. So their decision-making cannot take those people into account. And I think the internet has demonstrated the intelligence that lies at the edges. And the objective now is to utilize that to build new financial systems that build on that intelligence at the edges, where the centralized systems that don't work. And just to give you an example of that, for most people, a mortgage comes about. First of all, you have to have an identification. You have to have proof of income. And that means, and a stable proof of income. Now, even if you have an ID, the other two aspects are almost impossible to prove in an informal market in an emerging country. So it's thereby impossible to have a mortgage. So that is the centralized approach. That's the rule. If you want to buy a house, you have to have a mortgage, and therefore you have to have an income and a proof of income and a stable proof of income. Yet in the informal environment, by definition, the income is informal, so it's not proven. And the second part around that is everybody knows who works in this environment. It's also bunchy. In other words, it comes in and out at different times. It's not stable. So the whole thing around it is how do we devise products that take into account the up and down nature of income and that informality of that income. So the joy of blockchain and decentralization is that you build reputation as you go. So it's forward-looking as opposed to the traditional financial systems, which are completely backward-looking.
I'm wondering how you manage the cash flow from the investors to the people that ask for mortgages. How are you able, from one side, to ensure fundraising? And on the other side, how do you ensure that people will pay back their mortgages with such a decentralized model?
So to the first part of your question, the raising of the funds, one of the challenges of housing, obviously, is the fact that it's long-term. And it's illiquid. So the whole challenge around that is how do we create a liquid to make it liquid for investors, and how do we enable those flows to go back to those particular investors? And so we're using the NFT as a instrument in order to manage that. So it's a completely unique way that we're utilizing an NFT. Which effectively is a portion of the loan that is then provided to the end user. That is then tradable. The joy of NFTs also is that there are multiple values. And again, I think this is the interesting part of decentralization and these new instruments. To date, NFTs have been utilized as art pieces or as tickets, to something in particular. But I think we're utilizing it in a completely new way, and I think an interesting way that enables value to be added. So, for example, we can get celebrities to create something of value that then contributes to housing. So that enables us to reduce the cost of capital, which is a key part of what we're seeking to achieve. As I said, we don't want to be charging people 25% or 35% for their mortgage. So we're using NFTs to raise that in a way that creates value over and above the financial value. So that could be in artistic value. And of course, a key part of it is about impact and the measurement of impact. So a key part of this NFT is also the measurement of impact and the difference that it makes on the ground. So you combine those three elements together and you've got a completely new instrument, if you like, that enables the raising of capital to different people. So whether you're a philanthropist, whether you're an NFT collector, or you're just a collector of other things, or you're an impact investor, this can appeal to any one of those market segments and on differing basis. So we can put all of those kinds of things together. So, we're working, for example, we're working right now with a footballer who comes from Mozambique, but he's now a celebrity in Europe. So, we're working with him to put together a campaign that enables us to raise funds for his home country. On the other side, the joy of the blockchain is it enables us to track those payments and to make sure that they flow back to the NFT. So the joy of the blockchain here, and this is a key element in what the blockchain provides, is the ability to track that value in a verified way with that sense of immediacy. So in other words, we track in our project, we know exactly how it's doing at that time. Again, so often what happens in these large housing projects particularly is that you've got very many intermediaries and you have to wait for auditors to audit the books in order to establish what's happening, in order to get a sense of what's going on. But we can get a view of immediate view of what's happening with those financial flows, which obviously enables us to reduce pricing and enables us to have more sense of actually what's going on the ground. And the way that we control that payment is, as I say, it's forward-looking instead of backward-looking. So the methodology that we're using is lease to own. And that's a key shift, again, that we can manage through the blockchain, because, in fact, the developer continues to own that property until it's paid off. The demand that we're finding for this product is absolutely unbelievable. And I think that's one of the key messages that's here. A lot of people see this as impact investment, and we're doing amazing stuff in terms of uplifting people. But it's really, really not charity. This is done on the basis of there's so much pent-up demand for a quality product at a reasonable price that if people are given access to that, if there is so much demand, that 50 million backlog that I referred to, it's almost unlimited demand, because it's not that people can't afford it, because people pay a fortune to it. Always, as I always say, it's very expensive to be poor, because you have to pay more for everything. So it's not as if there isn't money there and that it can't pay for that. It's just finding a mechanism in order to do that. And that the lease to own or rent to own is a key element of that, because that enables us to reduce the risk for the developer, but give access to the end user or end owner, ultimate owner, that gives them access to get into the market, but to be able to pay rent. Because again, if you're poor, the objective here is you have to save money in order to build a deposit or in order to pay for the house completely if you can't get a mortgage. So what we're finding is that we're able to reduce the age already by 20 years that people can get access to a house. Because if you're paying rent and saving at the same time, it's not that extra saving, but you're able to contribute that to your own house, which, because there's a sense of ownership, immediate sense of ownership. So we're finding that the demand is virtually unlimited.
From the perspective of the buyer of the NFT, how would the buyer benefit? Is it solely philanthropic? So is it considered as a donation, or does the buyer of the NFT benefit in some way?
The buyer benefits in three ways. There can be an artistic value. So if you buy a Bored Ape, it has a value, and people can buy and sell that, and whatever the value that community gives that is the value of that. The other part is the impact that we refer to. Obviously, the ability to impact on somebody's life. You are fundamentally, through buying this NFT, you have the opportunity to fundamentally transform someone's life. And when I say that, I mean, I can't emphasize that enough already. Just for what we've done in the last 6 months, the stories that emerge from how people's lives have changed by having access to a house is just incredible. And the third element is financial return. So our whole objective is to make sure that there is financial return, and we're building that into the platform and into the system so that the return is there on an ongoing basis. So the whole thing around it is that those lease to own payments flow back to that NFT, and we're able to through the platform is to be able to manage that in such a way, again with the blockchain technology, cost effectively, that enables us to provide those returns back to that NFT.
Sounds good. Glen, can you give an overview of high-level view of the process, how it goes from one person buying an NFT or a few persons buying NFTs to constructions of houses in Africa? Are you the ones building the houses, or do you manage it differently?
Excellent question. We don't build the houses. And again, our whole objective here is not to build houses. Our whole objective is to empower other people who are on the ground to build houses. So our first project is a project we're using a development partner called Casa Real, based in Beira, Mozambique. Now, Mozambique is one of the most climate impacted countries in the world, one of the poorest countries in the world. And so when people, ask us why we chose Mozambique, our answer is always because if we can do it there, we can do it anywhere. So basically what happens is when you purchase that NFT, effectively that is a portion of the loan that is going to the end user, but it goes through the developer. So the property developer on the ground. So in this case, it's Casa Real in the example that I'm using. The value flows through Casa Real to the end user on the ground, who is then able to do a lease to own. So what that does is that enables Casa Real to have the cash flow to be able to continue building. So it stimulates their business, but it provides the opportunity for the end user to move into the house and pay on a lease to own basis. That flow, the tenant pays rent in Metacash. So it's not as if they are having to be crypto, boffin and have wallets and download wallets and all of that kind of stuff. They pay it in fiat, and it then gets recorded on the blockchain, and that value flows back again to the NFT. So effectively what we're doing is providing, as I said to you, the challenge was liquidity and timing. So we're able to provide the liquidity for people who are looking to contribute to housing, to invest in housing, and we're able to provide the value flows from the person back. But that is done through the value effectively flows through the provider on the ground, the developer, the affordable housing developer on the ground. The value flows through them. They're a key partner in this ecosystem.
And were you able to facilitate deconstruction of houses already, or is it still something that we'll be doing in the future?
In 6 months, we have grown the home loan market in Mozambique by 5%. Now, it's an insane statistic. Obviously, it's a ridiculously low base, but we have already enabled more than 30 families to move into affordable homes through Casa Real, through this methodology. So we've already proven it. We've already demonstrated it. We've already got people living in houses funded through this mechanism. And we've demonstrated this entire process by selling the NFTs, raising the funds, enabling the funds to flow to the developer, and for them to be able to market this as a new product, to be able to get it to the market and to be able to get those flows back. And we've managed to do all of that within 6 months and grow the home loan market by 5%.
So that's impressive. And are you already aiming to expand to other African countries, or are you still focusing on Mozambique?
No, in fact, we signed our very first MOU for the next housing provider, because obviously we have to do serious due diligence on them. Our ultimate aim is to build it into trustless environment. But right now, we have to be the gatekeeper and build the relationship with really trusted providers, such as Casa Real. And we've just signed an MOU with our first Nigerian housing developer. So our objective next year is to move into Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa. The joy of what we're doing is that effectively it's country agnostic. Again, through the blockchain, this is one of the joys of it, through the platform. It really makes absolutely no difference whether we're dealing with Mozambique or South Africa. It just is more difficult in Mozambique because there's less infrastructure and there's less blockchain infrastructure, actually, less crypto infrastructure. But the other markets are going to be easier because there's more infrastructure there in terms of value flows and that kind of capability. But that's the joy of what we're doing, and that's what we're seeking to prove. So that's why we chose, as I say, Mozambique, because it's climate impacted and relatively challenging. So to be able to move into those countries should be easier, and that's the whole objective for next year.
And can you say a few words on the roadmap of Empowa? other than based on what you've said right now and the milestones that you have set and how you're aiming to grow in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So our whole objective, one of the challenges we have is that we actually we put together a sort of very clear roadmap, and we started getting into it and realized what we thought was important was completely not so, and the other way around. What we thought was unimportant was very important, and that's one of the challenges of RealFi. Because we're actually building this platform as we go, and we're doing it as we meet the challenges. But our whole objective, as I say, is to expand into these countries and to raise these levels of funding into each of these countries as we go. Our objective is within the next 5 years to have more than $1 billion worth of funding for houses throughout Africa. That's our objective. Because, as we've always said, 50 million homes, if we were building at 100,000 a year, which is nowhere near the capacity right now in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa particularly, if you exclude South Africa, there are very few that can build more than tens or maximum hundreds of houses in a year. So our objective, if we're going to meet the backlog, is we have to start doing this at scale. So we have to find trusted partners and really find a mechanism by which we can do that. Obviously, what we're doing in the meantime is building the platform to enable that to happen, building the campaigns, building proof of concepts, so that we can then get not just decentralized funding, but more of the institutional funding from development institutions, etc., on board as well, which is a key element to what we're doing.
I'm curious to know more about your personal journey in launching Empowa. So once you have decided to launch Empowa and to leverage blockchain, considering all its attributes, since you didn't have specific experience using blockchain, I'm curious to know how you were able to learn about the technology, about the way it works and its technical aspects, and at the same time be able to deliver.
Yeah, and for that, I'm eternally grateful to the communities that have emerged from this technology. I find it absolutely fascinating. The joy of decentralization and the joy of networking and community is incredible. So it actually is quite an amazing story, because exactly that. One of my colleagues now at Empowa turned around and said, with what you're doing, have you looked at blockchain? And I had looked at it in my previous life. I'd looked at Bitcoin as a mechanism to transfer funds, particularly between Zim and South Africa. And I had put it away because of its volatility. It wasn't really useful in terms of that capability. It was before, the transactional capability really of Bitcoin. So I put it away and I disregarded it. So somebody said to me, have a look at Cardano. And so I started doing some research into Cardano, and I was really taken by the community and Charles Hoskinson's approach, particularly to Africa. His whole philosophy was very similar to mine in terms of that why, as an accident of birth, should you be prejudiced against having access to financial resources? And I actually just put my hand on, joined a Cardano forum, and I just highlighted this challenge of housing, affordable housing. And I said, I think that there might be potentially, blockchain might offer a solution to this, but I don't have the skills and resources. Is there anybody out there who could perhaps help me? And it was at the time of COVID, and so it was lockdown. So everybody was online and nobody was at work. And Phil from Australia, Phil Lewis, who's now the co-founder of Empowa, he sits in Perth, and he put his hand up and he said, "Yeah, this sounds like an interesting challenge." And we sat down and started writing the white paper. And the white paper that we sat down and we wrote, we put it together, and so there's brainstorming and lots of backing and forth. And And so I always say we're a love story that started on the Cardano forum. And so then what we did was we actually, sent out this white paper to everybody that we knew to critique, both at the blockchain level and at the affordable housing level, and got as much feedback as we could, from people in the know, because we're trying to, in RealFi, you're trying to overcome mistrust on both sides of the equation. On the crypto side, it's like, well, why? There's so much opportunity to create, wealth by just trading. Why bother with the challenges of RealFi? And on the housing side, people saying, really, you're going to use crypto? Isn't that drug dealers and money launderers? So to overcome the mistrust was challenging. So we actually put a funding application into Project Catalyst, which is, as you probably know, is the Cardano Catalyst projects that they fund, emerging projects, which are voted for by the community. And we put together a project whereby we said we'll build the first homes in Mozambique to prove to the crypto community that we could do so, and to prove to the housing community that crypto could actually fund this. And we got funded through Project Catalyst. So we raised the first funding for the first 2 homes. We ended up building 4. And the whole objective also with that was to push the ecological boundaries, because, again, it's to make sure if we're going to build 50 million homes, we can't build them in traditional ways. So we have to make sure that they're environmentally not impacting the environment so drastically either. And so we got our first project through Project Catalyst, and that got funded. And then we did an ISPO. And so it's been all of that kind of thing that we've been doing to set up a staking pool, to put up that together in order to raise funds, in order to continue what we're doing, and to get the team together in order to do the NFT sales. So we really are a Cardano love story.
Oh, so you obviously believe in the potential of Web3 and how it could benefit the developments of African countries. So this is a question I ask all of my guests. What's your vision for the future of the African continent in the age of Web3? And what place do you see Empowa occupy in such a future?
I'm really excited about. I'm an Afro-optimist, and the reason for that is exactly because of this technology. The example of M-Pesa, the money transfer story through Africa, as you know, the mobile phone take up, the leapfrogging that Africa did by going to mobile phones. The key part around this technology, I believe, is actually the youth. Because Africa is so young, Africa is going to adopt Web3 technology far earlier than the rest of the world. And not just, and because Africa is young, and because Africa has the greatest need for this technology. When you talk about a wallet to wallet exchange in Europe, if you can send money from one person to another, yes, it goes through a centralized system, but it works. The system works. There's no real need for that technology, for the ability to send funds from person to person. M-Pesa proved that there's a real need in Africa because the existing systems don't work. And I think that's the really exciting part for me, is because where there are no systems, or the systems don't work, there's so much more opportunity. Just like it was where there were no landlines, mobile phones had the real opportunity to take over, and they did. It's the same with this technology. We have a real opportunity. And the other thing about it for me is that it's decentralized. And the decentralization is the key element to the empowerment of Africa, because there are so many good people on the ground doing amazing things. But the challenge is that it's so generally, and I'm going to generalize here, but it's so badly managed at the central level, at the institutional level, at the governmental level. It is so badly managed. But the people have had enough. And I think that decentralization, by enabling people to be empowered, both at the informational and at the financial level, the decentralized empowerment of that, I think, is incredibly exciting. And I think we're going to see things emerging that we have no idea that we can't even conceptualize at this stage, because because of the power of the intellect and resourcefulness at the fringes. And I mean, we know, if you've lived in Africa, the resourcefulness of the people on the ground is just mind-boggling. How we've survived, how we get through things, how we make a plan is just incredible. And I think that's the really exciting part. So for me, if Empowa can have a small part of that and just contribute in some small way to making living conditions better, to enable people to be empowered. And just to give you one story around one of the women who we've supplied, of those 30 homes now that we've supplied in the last batch of NFTs, one of the women there was talking about her ability just to access water, because she rented a house, but the water that she had access to was in somebody else's house. The fact that she could have her own space with her own water, and as you can imagine, not spoken about, but her own sanitation, the empowerment of that for her, the safety that provides her, the ability for her to provide her children with that safe environment, for them to be able to study better, for them to have lighting, for them to be not baking in a tin can, which is how most people in shacks, in these corrugated iron shacks have to live, that they're not baking hot. That the impact of that is so profound. And if we at Empowa can have a small role in uplifting the empowering the people to uplift themselves in that small way, that will make me very, very happy.
Glen, what advice would you give to entrepreneurs, and especially young entrepreneurs that also would like to have an impact and leverage blockchain technology to launch a project? So there are a lot of skills to learn. The mechanisms behind Web3 are very different from the traditional ones we're used to. And most importantly, it's new. So there is still much to imagine, and there is still much to build. All of this can be intimidating. So since you have launched Empowa, you've had decent experience. Is there some advice you would like to share with people who also would like to have an impact and have a project in mind they would like to realize?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great question. And the biggest thing is stay curious. That is, for me, is the biggest attribute, is stay curious. The issue for me, particularly with this technology, is that any problem you have, I think if we apply our minds, there's ways that we can resolve it. It's not insurmountable. I think we've got so used to the thinking that some of these problems are insurmountable. So stay curious. Really, that's the biggest thing. Stay curious. Read, keep reading, keep online, keep reading, seeing what's happening. And the other thing is, the biggest thing for me is this sense of community. There is so much goodwill out there. There are so many people who are willing to support if you put your hand up and if you are also prepared to do the work. So in other words, it's not about spoon feeding, but it's about, I have a challenge. This is my challenge. Has anybody had it before? Can you think about it? So just as I've told the story of our launch, that has been repeated. Everybody, we're a completely virtual organization. We have people all over the world who've put their hands up and said, I like this. I'm prepared to contribute. And that was before there was any funding available. And so it was just around, that's the whole thing. There are communities of people out there who really are, I think there's a vast majority of people are tired of the way things are. And I think people are wanting change and they're wanting to create change. And I think that's a huge opportunity for people who are wanting to do the same. And it's to really find like-minded people. And with that, the ability to build that energy, to build that momentum, and to keep curious, keep learning, and keep finding solutions. The normal entrepreneurial attributes need to apply, because it's hard work and it's challenging, and there's lots of naysayers out there. But I think if you do that really, the power of people, the decentralized all over the world. There are people who are wanting to make a difference and to do things and are willing to contribute in ways that you can't even imagine if you just find them and put it out there and, be open to learning and be respectful of other people's time, but understand that there are lots of people out there who are willing to work towards change.
Talking about sense of community, I would say that sense of community is also one of the strengths of the culture of so many African countries. That's also why I think Web3 has a lot of potential in Africa, because Web3 works through a community. It doesn't work as we've been saying, a centralized model. It works through a consensus, and a consensus, there must be community for it to work. My feeling is that in most African countries, the sense of community is very existent, and it has a lot of importance within the life of each individual.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that's, again, one of the attributes of Africa that makes it very exciting. And that's why I do feel that our time has come in Africa. I really believe that. I really believe that we're going to find incredible ways of doing things because of exactly that. And as I say, we're resourceful. It's amazing how resourceful people are, and what a sense of community the vast majority of Africans have. And I agree with you. I think that is really exciting, that decentralized aspect and the level of intelligence, because there's no longer a central blockage. And so often we've had the central blockage. We can't do things because there's something or some institution that blocks us. And I think that's really one of the great opportunities. Just to give you a sense of that, the Casa Real, who was funded before, for them to get funds through the system took 6 months for the funds to flow. Obviously, through what we were doing, we were able to get it there in a day. Now, that's around just transformation. Things can be done differently. We can do things differently, and that's very exciting.
How can people follow you and follow Empowa? And also, how can people contribute to the initiative, whether through buying an NFT or directly contributing in building the project?
So we're on all the social media platforms: Telegram, internet, all the platforms, Discord, etc. So we're on there. Empowa.io is the website. All of them are available on there. You can see all the links to the various social media channels. Personally, I sort of tend to be on LinkedIn, in my personal capacity mostly, but also available through the website or on Telegram. And absolutely, we appreciate your support. As we said, we absolutely and fundamentally know we cannot do this, and we're not seeking to do this on our own. We're not seeking to do this in a centralized way. So we know that we can only be as good as our community. So we'd really appreciate any support in any shape or form. In terms of NFT, the NFT sales also on the website. You can purchase it directly off the website. Follow our progress, see how we're going, join our journey. As we always say, join our journey. We don't know, we know where we're going. We don't know how we're going to get there yet. But we're going to work really, really hard to make sure that we deliver on our promise, which is affordable housing for the enabling of affordable housing in Africa.
Great. Glen, it was an absolute pleasure to have you at the Tomorrow.Africa podcast. And I'm looking forward to talking to you soon to discuss all of the achievements of Empowa.
Thank you. And thank you so much for your time. And thanks for your interest and excellent questions. It's been really a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Feel free to visit our website, Tomorrow.Africa, and subscribe to our channels to be updated about the future episodes. We publish 2 episodes per month at the 1st and 15th of each month, so stay tuned for the next ones. And until then, stay curious, stay ambitious, and see you tomorrow.